Good Shepherd Sunday of our Paschal celebration. This week, the reflection that I've been working on is one that's been a long time in coming, a conversation that I believe is very important to us to have as we work together to build up our church, the body of Christ, the mission of our God here on earth. I hope it's also a conversation that will be interesting and useful to you in your own mission and ministry. I want to talk about the vocation to priesthood, the vocation to priestly life and sacramental ministry. But I want to talk about it from a very practical perspective. First, to acknowledge something that we know well, and that is that in the Archdiocese of San Antonio, we have struggled to find young men who are capable and willing to lead our parishes. And because of that, we have suffered as a church with leaders that weren't capable and with parishes that are without anything other than nominal leadership. Those of you who know me know that at my peak, I think I was pastor of 4 parishes. That's not great leadership. And many of you have experienced priests who didn't have the skills of leadership. Some of you have complained about it. Others are more gracious. Either way, the church hurts when we don't have available the sacramental teaching and pastoral leadership that our church needs. It would be worth considering some of the reasons why this happens, and it would be worth identifying something that we can do to make this better. I believe that the most significant struggle in both recruiting and retaining priests is the disconnect between kind of the popular image of what priesthood is or is supposed to be and the reality of living as a priest, as a pastor of a parish in the Archdiocese of San Antonio. Like, that disconnect is hard on both ends. It's difficult to recruit people if they believe that the life that they're taking on is something akin to that of a Tibetan monk, because we don't have a lot of young men living in San Antonio that want to live like Tibetan monks. On the bright side, Catholic priesthood, as a parish priest, doesn't look anything like being a Tibetan monk. In fact, it doesn't even look anything like being a Carmelite monk. That our priestly life and ministry is incredibly connected to the life of our people and is injected into the living and loving of our communities. Which also makes it difficult, because if a few people finally do say, oh yes, I want to live that life and I want to be a monk, and then they come and they more or less survive seminary, because seminaries are a little bit like monasteries, and then they get out into priestly life and ministry and they're like, oh, this isn't what I signed up for. That's a problem. That's a problem. An idea for a solution. When I was just ordained, Assumption Seminary was trying to build new dorms. And so they had a development committee, right? They probably had a fancier name for it than that, but they were a fundraising committee. And I was invited to be part of this committee, not because I had a lot of rich friends and not because I had a lot of business connections, but because I could tell the story of the horrible old dorms that I had lived in. They really weren't that bad. But that's, I believe, what got me onto this committee. But I learned a lot as I'm sitting around as a brand new priest on this development committee with the leadership of the development people, the professionals who came in to teach us how to do this. As a committee, we sat around the table and we identified who could meaningfully support this fundraising effort, who had the capacity and the interest. And then once we identified those people, then we looked around the room and said, who here would be the best person to invite them? Who needs to write the note? Who needs to call them? How do we do this? Like, that was the work of our committee. And you know what? It worked. I think we raised in the end some $18 million to build a dorm. And the new dorm's there. It's not new anymore, but it's there. I mentioned that experience because later the same year, I was invited to be part of our parish Sarah Club Vocation Committee at Holy Spirit. And I'm like, yes, this is exciting. And so I went, and there were a bunch of grandmothers who got together in a room at the parish and prayed the rosary. And I was so discouraged that we thought that that was how God was going to raise up leadership for our church, that that's how God was going to use us to bring about the call for young men in our parish and our church. I never really did anything about it over the years. And I don't know if it's now just because I'm getting older and I think I want to retire at some point, or because I'm tired of being pastor of 4 parishes, or because I know that the parish I'm building now is going to be full very soon and we're going to have to start a new one, and there's no one to run or start it, much less the one I'm working on now. Like, because I've heard the cries of the people who have been underserved in their parishes for whatever reasons. I think it's time for us to look seriously at this question of how do we invite, how does God call young men to priestly life and ministry? When I was in seminary, they used to tell us that priests were the ones who gave their whole life to Christ. And until we get over that absolutely wrong impression of the Christian life, we're not going to have a lot of luck here. Because the baptized person is the one who gives her or his entire life to Christ. And that's true of those who are connected and involved and come to daily mass, and it's true of those who work their tails off all the time but still squeeze in without failing Sunday mass every week. And it's true of those who are lost off somewhere in the woods and need the Good Shepherd to go and find them and place them gently on his shoulders and bring them home. The Christian gives her or his entire life to Christ. That's not what's distinctive about priesthood. And we can only recruit priests from among those who are already giving their entire life to Christ, from families that give their entire family to Christ. Like, that's the only place to start from. But once we started from there, what is it that we're looking for in those who are called to priesthood? Priests should pray. But guess what? So should moms and dads and 5-year-old children. And in our lives, there are different moments and different priorities. And probably when our children are 5, we aren't going to pray as much as when everybody's moved out of the house and we can sit in our chair quietly for an hour at a time. But we all have to struggle to find time and emotional space to pray. That is not specific to priesthood. So please don't bring me people that want to pray all the time, right? That isn't the specific skill that's required of our priests. What we need is men who are capable of and willing to serve and to lead, and to see their leadership as a form of service, and to give of themselves in sacramental and teaching and pastoral leadership. All of us are going to participate in some way in the teaching of the church. All of us are going to participate in some way in the sacramental life of the church. All of us are going to participate in some way in the pastoral leadership of the church. Most of us will. But who will take on the role of dedicating their life, their gifts, to the service of these efforts? Who will organize our church for us? Who has those gifts? Those of you who have brought your concerns and complaints about your priest, please tell me that you know what you're looking for in a pastor. Think about that. Pray about that. What are you looking for in the pastor of your parish community? And then let's find some young men who have these gifts. And then let's find out who should invite them. I'd be happy to help, but I'm not the strongest voice. It's a voice that parents need to use. It's a voice that neighbors need to use. It's a voice that the person sitting 2 pews over who's been watching this kid grow up needs to use. It's the voice that girlfriends, or at least ex-girlfriends, need to use to invite and encourage and to be God's voice. In a sacramental church, God doesn't come in transcendental meditation to invite people to consider priestly ministry. I get very nervous about the people who in transcendental meditation thought that God was calling them to the priesthood. It almost never works out. It's almost always narcissistic personality disorder. But in our sacramental church, God sent his Son to vibrate the air and vibrate our eardrums. And he left us with that mission to continue that effort, which means that you have to use your vocal cords to vibrate the air, to vibrate somebody's eardrums, to invite them to consider a life of service and leadership in our church. Find somebody who already dedicates their whole life to Christ, but ask them to consider dedicating their gifts and their talents and their abilities to the leadership of our church community. In my own experience of priestly ministry, I have found a life that is so connected and so rich in ways that I've almost started to take for granted. And from time to time, my prayer has to be one to remind me of what a blessed and precious and incredibly fortunate place that I've been given in the life of our church and parish community. The kind of life that allows me to sit with a family, kneel with a family around the bed of their dying mother, and maybe even rub her feet as she dies. Right? The incredible blessing of 20 years ago playing Duck, Duck, Goose with a 3-year-old who called me a few months ago to ask if I would be part of her marriage ceremony. Like those connections in life that allow me to be in the most sacred places of people's growing and living and family, not in any way sealed off behind walls in a monastery, but rather invited into the most sacred places of people's lives and homes. And a responsibility and a call to lead and engage a parish community that will be for those who are lost, a good shepherd who will bring them home, who will share God's love, and to find that love, to fill my life, and then to offer that love freely. Like it's a very beautiful and meaningful call that I, for me, encourage you to consider, but way more importantly, I encourage you to look for those who would do this well, and to invite them, and to talk to your friends about who would be best to invite them. And let's find servant leaders. Let's find sacramental ministers. Let's find priests and pastors for our churches, for our parishes, here in the Archdiocese of San Antonio.